Hi, my name is Ryan Sims, and today I'm speaking on the playing field. Practice makes pixel perfect.
So, this is something that's kind of been just going through my mind for quite some time now. Is just thinking about what it means to become a great designer, or if you're not shooting for great, what it takes to become a better designer. And we don't talk about practice very much, for whatever reason. Most of us, and I would even put myself inside this category as of a few months ago, a year ago, kind of consider practice to be beneath us on a certain level. And kind of the general kind of mantra of our entire industry in regards to how do I become a great designer, how do I get better, the mantra is kind of always the same, and it's do more work. And you hear this all the time, just do more work, right? Like you want to become a great designer, and all you have to do is just start building projects. And when you finish that project, hopefully you'll get a little bit better project, and that will just kind of keep cycling and cycling until one day you're doing projects for Nike, or you're building your own web apps, and you're an expert. And today I really want to look at what's kind of flawed with that sort of thinking. I will say as a caveat, when you do more work, when you follow this mantra, you do get better. The objective of this talk is to not discount the importance of doing work and just doing large volumes of work over and over. But today I really want to try and talk about instead of just focusing solely on this whole repetition thing, this whole doing work over and over and over, doing large volumes of work, I want to talk about understanding what it means to have talent. It's another thing that I think we kind of skew a little bit. Also want to look at ways that we can think about how we acquire skills as designers and ultimately gain experience. And then towards the end, I'd like to talk about a few ways that we can work practice into your time, and hopefully create some sort of balance, some good balance between work, play, and focused study. So let's talk about talent. I'm very honored to be here today and listed among just tons of talented speakers. And that word talent gets thrown around a lot. I use it all the time when we talk about this industry. It's all about talent. Like I'll hire someone that doesn't have as much experience as long as they've got boatloads of talent, and we kind of make it into this kind of magical biological thing. And I think we go a little bit too far with that. I think honestly, talent is kind of just, it's overhyped. It's meant to kind of, it's meant to convey this sort of feeling that like certain people are predestined to be really great designers and certain people aren't. And I'm sorry if you're not. That's just how life is. And if you are, well, then you're lucky. And I don't think that's quite the case. When I think about my childhood, my dad was a basketball coach, and he was just a student of the game. He coached for 20 some odd years. The only thing he liked more than studying the game of basketball was teaching it to people who didn't know it. And so basketball was a part of my life from, basically the day I was born. I was shooting hoops before I even knew how to walk. There was always basketball trips with my dad's teams. I was always going around, following them around. There was basketball practices every night of the week. And for 5 months out of the year, our family was just all about basketball, basketball, basketball. And you combine that with the fact that I'm kind of a tall dude. I've always been a head taller than most of the people I grew up with. And you've got this really great breeding ground for sort of creating a great basketball player. But why am I here speaking to you today then, if that's the case? If I had so much talent, I was sort of put on this earth to play basketball, then why am I here? And simply, talent is the desire to practice. And this is kind of a concept you don't hear about very much. But here's where I think it becomes important, because when I was growing up, I was a really good basketball player. I was playing basketball for my school and summer leagues and in just various other competitive leagues all across the state. And looking back, what I began to notice is, now that I'm older, a funny thing happened when I turned 14, and that was my desire to practice just began to wane. I got into things like girls and rock and roll and design, and these things started to become more important to me. And so instead of nights and weekends being devoted to basketball practices and tournaments, there were dates and there was band practices. And what I was slowly starting to realize was, people were always kind of telling me, man, Ryan, you've got so much talent. No one ever said to me, man, Ryan, you're in the best possible situation to become a basketball player. And it was always about this sort of magical, God-given ability that I was put on this earth to do. And what it really was I was racking up serious amounts of practice. And it didn't really feel like practice at the time. Basketball was fun to me. It was natural. Like I said, it was a part of my life since I can even remember. But instead of saying, wow, you're in this great position to become a great basketball player, people just kept telling me, you've got a God-given ability to do this. And so again, why am I here? If this is the case, if I was put on this earth to play basketball, why am I talking to you? I didn't suffer some kind of crazy injury. God didn't just one day magically take all my talent away and say, you're not a basketball player anymore. It's because my desire to practice waned. Another thing that I think we have to realize is, practice. There's a million ways to practice, but the common characteristics among them is that practice, it has to be habitual. Pro athletes develop daily and weekly practice habits that they keep for an entire career, and I couldn't keep that going. So practice requires a recurring time commitment. Another thing that I think we kind of is sort of kind of fundamentally flawed about about our industry in general is we like to lump people into the same category. We like to treat them the same, and we say in spite of all the the different ways that we have of working and the totally different set of needs that we have, we like to lump everyone in the same category, and we just apply these kind of vague mantras and terminologies for them, and we think about experience as kind of being this gauge on our forehead, right? Like if we're exposed to knowledge enough, over time that gauge will slowly go from empty to completely full. And that's again, that's not how it works, because there's this really interesting study done by two brothers, the Dreyfus brothers, who set out to work on a computer that could learn how to play chess. And, not a computer that would play chess, but a computer that could actually learn how to play chess. And then what they realized, that there wasn't just the one gauge, that there was two gauges, essentially. There was one dial that was labeled rules. And when you're a novice, that dial is set to 10. And there was a second rule, or a second label, a second gauge that was labeled intuition. And that dial is, and when you're a beginner, when you're a novice, that's set completely to 0. And what you start to see happen over time is, in the beginning, you have the stage 1, you're a novice. You don't particularly know how to do much of anything. So you have this different set of needs. Your first time skydiving, all you're concerned about is where's the lever I pull and when do I pull it? You're not concerned with tons of the different aspects of the art of skydiving or any of that kind of stuff. You're just worried about getting your ass back down on the ground, safe. And then from there, you go to a stage 2, advanced beginner, and these people, they still want information fast. They still to learn that dial for rules is still set pretty high. And although they begin to form some, to formulate some principles, they still don't have a holistic, they don't have a holistic understanding of the entire process. And then one day, if you're lucky enough to graduate from advanced beginner, you go to competent. And now this is a really, really exciting time for you, because what you're starting to realize is that you can start to do stuff on your own. You're starting to develop conceptual models of all the things around you. You're starting to realize, that dial, that rules dial, is slowly going down to 0. And this is when the process gets really fun, because as a competent designer, you start to do stuff on your own. You start experimenting more. You start learning how to do, different things that were kind of, before, it was all based on rules. It was learning the software, learning HTML, learning CSS, learning all that kind of stuff. And now you're able to graduate onto that. It's sort of like a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old's kind of just like a miniature person. They can walk around, they can start to have conversations, and they've got kind of the whole world wrapped around their finger. They're potty trained, they can poop on their own. So this is an exciting time for a 2-year-old. Lastly, you have experts. And experts are really interesting, and you can, when you get to the point to where you're an expert on something, you can easily pick them out, because experts love to talk in metaphors. They love to tell stories. If you've ever heard two experts talk, it's sort of hard to understand what they're really saying, because the rules aren't enough anymore. At this point, the intuition dial is all the way to 10, and the rules are all the way to 0, because you have the larger conceptual framework now. You don't need all the kind of boring, tedious rules that you had as a novice. And what you're doing now is you're relying completely on intuition, which is awesome, because most of the time your intuition is right. That's what makes you an expert. You can't always explain how you know what you know. You just know that you know it. And still, we still kind of force these experts to follow a set of rules, and that ultimately degrades their performance. I mean, you've seen it 100 times. You make an expert, you make kind of the smartest person on your team do kind of some asinine, mundane task, and they just you. You know, they're bored. That stuff bores them, and they're going to make it into a game, and they're going to make you look silly. So the reason why we kind of go through this, I think it's important to understand that we all go through this. You know, we all transition through this as we gain experience. And, you know, chances are that the audience I'm talking to today, most of you guys are probably in the 3 and the 4s. I would say a majority of the people in the 4s and the 3s. I could be way off, but I imagine that there are definitely some 5s, and maybe there are some 1s and 2s. The good thing is that when you're thinking about it in the sense of capital D design, you might be, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but you know, it stretches a lot bigger than that. You know, you might be at a lot of different stages on a lot of different things. So you might be a 5 on CSS 3 and a 5 on HTML5, but you could be a 1 on information architecture. You could be a 2 on, you know, just sort of, you know, whatever other thing. So it's really important. The reason why it's important to understand this is when you understand how this flow kind of happens as you start to gain experience, you can start to go through this process quicker, because you'll start to understand, you know, it's really frustrating when you're an expert in something to go back to a 1, right? Because you're always kind of wanting to, you know what it's like to go from 1 to 5, and you kind of just want that to keep happening. The problem is that it doesn't work that way. So understanding this will hopefully help you when you start to tackle new things, start thinking about them in the context of, you know, yes, there is a natural progression here, and all that. So the next big thing is practice. So once we've started, we've kind of identified that talent is it's not quite so mysterious. You know, it's about putting the time in. It's about, you know, just continuing to do work, but also having that desire to do everything that goes along with that. And, you know, contrary to what you might think, merely doing your job every day doesn't really qualify as practice. You know, when you go to meetings, you're not practicing your people skills. When you type an email, you're not practicing typing. But we seem to think that when we do more work, we're practicing design, and that's just not the case. Because we have to understand that working hard on the right thing is you know, probably more important than working hard. Because once we start to identify that you know, that it's practice that makes us better, focused study, actually taking the time to learn new things, to build that conceptual framework around everything that you're learning, you know, working hard, it's not really so much about that. You know, a lot of people mistake working hard for freaking out. I mean, Katerina Fake, one of the founders of Flickr, wrote a wonderful article on this, just talking about, you know, the things that we do as designers to sort of justify that we're working hard. And a lot of those things include just kind of, you know, freaking out. There's many times that, you know, I've told people I'm doing research, you know, and I'm checking my RSS feed. You know, we like to you know, kind of make things sound a little bit different than they actually are, when, you know, the real crux of the matter is that, you know, working smart and working on the right things is you know, ultimately way more valuable. So, you know, there's this real danger here of spending too much time on the playing field. You know, and I would, you know, sort of attribute that to just being completely focused on just doing work, doing lots of work, doing tons of work. You know, we don't, it's like we're one of the only fields that does that. I can't, you know, I can't really understand it because if you think about a brain surgeon, we don't tell them to do work, you know. We don't even let them do work for like 10 years. You know, if they developed brain surgery around the same concept that we kind of think about design as being, you know, we'd lose hundreds of people before he'd actually get it right the first time. You know, it's kind of, you know, backwards completely. So understanding that, again, that the main training value of you know, just of like performing work, of doing work, is to point out the weaknesses for future study and improvement. So when you think about a person who's playing chess, right? You've got a chess enthusiast who can spend thousands and thousands of hours playing chess and never really get better. That's because they're not really practicing. They're not really, you know, they enjoy playing chess and it's fun to them. But I could take a student and properly train them in you know, in chess strategy, if I was that awesome, and you know, in a relatively short amount of time, you know, train them to basically, you know, be better than the chess enthusiast who has logged thousands and thousands of hours of playing. Again, that's because the main value of these exercises, of going on the playing field, of doing work, is so that you can learn what you did wrong, and you can go back and you can work on it, you can practice on it. So, you know, again, what's really important here is you know, taking these ideas and applying them to your job and thinking about momentum, because when you think back to the original example of me playing basketball, what you kind of have is you have this kind of strum, and you have this it's really front loaded with all this practice, and you know, it didn't really necessarily feel like practice at the time. It was fun, and I was learning all these skills, learning all these techniques, but eventually it just kind of waned. And what we need to do is we need to keep a consistent strum going. So keep that momentum alive. This is a lot easier to do at an agency because, you know, you're kind of constantly cycling through projects and, you know, new challenges and new things, and you're doing work, and hopefully, you know, you're also practicing in between there. It's really important to keep this momentum going. So let's talk about a few ways that we can, you know, realistically practice. Because, believe me, if someone had told me that I needed to practice design a couple years ago, I kind of would have rolled my eyes at them. It does kind of feel like a silly thing. But the good thing is that most of you are probably practicing and doing a bit of practice. You just don't realize that you're doing it. So let's start to identify, you know, what those things are. And the first one is you know, building a side project, like working on a blog. And Tim mentioned this earlier. The really important thing here is that when you're doing work, when you're on the clock, and when you've got deadlines and you've got clients and all that kind of stuff, it's not the most conducive environment to try new things, right? You're going to stick with what you know. You're going to continue to do the things that come easy to me because you're under the gun. And the wonderful thing about building your own sandbox is you kind of remove all of that. And now you've got this nice sort of friendly environment by which you can start to focus on new skills. Even if no one ever sees it. I mean, the objective here is not to you know, make your name more popular or hopefully develop a blog that, you know, one day is sort of, you know, your lifeblood and pays for your rent. The idea here is that, you know, this is a safe place where you can take the time that you need to learn CSS, to learn jQuery, to learn all these things. And that's honestly that's how I learned pretty much everything I know. I had a small blog called Just Watch the Sky, and I've probably done close to 25 iterations that have never even seen the light of day. But I learned CSS there. I learned how to write there. I learned jQuery there. And before I learned them by doing them on that site, I was not using any of those skills within, at my job at an agency. But after that, it was after I learned CSS, we started incorporating that into everything that we did at that agency. So again, it's about the environment there. It's low pressure and sort of just really friendly environment to learn. The second is mentorship. Go on inspiration sprees. And I'm not talking about just checking. I'm not talking like subscribing to like Smashing Magazine, or list sites, or CSS galleries and all this stuff that you kind of just monotonous, oh my God, another amazing 2-column blog. It's not about that. It's more about just going on sprees, like finding someone that you really admire. For me, it was a designer called Arnaud Mercier, who's a French designer. I've never met Arnaud in my life, but that man taught me so much about design. He's my mentor. And the reason why it wasn't like I was just haphazardly, checking occasionally. Oh, there's another great site by Arnaud. That's not surprising. I was hitting Arnaud's site weekly, just waiting for that new piece of work. Go on inspiration sprees, and don't limit that to designers. You can go outside of that, to another creative field. If it's an audio engineer, if it's a writer, a lot of these creative industries sort of bleed together, and a lot of the principles that they use to become better writers and the stuff that becomes evident in their work getting better, you can also take and apply to design. And the other part about mentorship is we can't be scared to copy. Because if you think about that line of going from a novice to an expert, for a good chunk of that time, you're not really able to just apply your own sense of style to what you're doing. And this is where mentors come in very handy. Helmut Krohn is the man that developed, basically the Volkswagen ad campaign, the Lemon, and a series of other ads back in the 60s that basically changed modern advertising. And you've heard the quote before, like good designers copy, great designers steal. I think Picasso said that. The idea here is that you're not just blatantly ripping them off. You're looking to them. You're looking to someone who clearly is higher than you on the Dreyfus model, and what you're saying is, I'm going to start using techniques that they do, and I may not completely understand them right now, but the more that I look up to them, the more that I do it, I'm going to start to connect those pieces. I'm going to start to get that conceptual framework. And again, if you're lucky enough to have a mentor that you actually, talk to, not like the Arnaud instance, that's clearly the most, preferred way of dealing with mentorship. It would be fantastic if, Jeffrey Zellman sort of took me under his wing and said, Ryan, I'm going to mentor you. I would say, yes, Jeffrey. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Because the other thing you have to understand about this is when you start getting to the 4 and to the 5, when you start being proficient and start being, start thinking that you're an expert, go out of your way to reach out to these younger designers. Be a mentor to them. Because the really great thing about mentorship is that sure, the lesser, component of that mentorship definitely gets obvious sort of educational value out of that, but so does the mentor. They get high quality work and access to a sharp beginner's mind. And with the right people, sometimes mentorships become collaborations. And that's a really awesome time in that relationship. So the other thing here is not just collaboration between mentors, but go out of your way. If you work with a team of other designers, go out of your way to work with them. No, you don't have to do like poster mashups and like crazy weird web apps and like, all this kind of stuff. That's not really the kind of collaboration I'm talking about. Spend some time watching them work. Let them spend time watching you work. Some of the best things I ever learned in design, I learned from a 16-year-old kid named Keegan Jones that I hired. And 16 years old, and I'm 24 at this point. And I learned so much from watching him work. I really can't stand it when designers look me in the eye and say, yeah, it makes me uncomfortable to watch you work. Like, I've got my own thing, you've got your own thing. Let's just leave it at that. A student, someone who's really, just a student of becoming a great designer, is going to soak up information from other people, paths that other people have taken that they haven't figured out for themselves yet. The fourth thing is become a better writer. Now, the reason why I say this is because for me, I don't, when I'm thinking about hiring to my team, this is a really important aspect of potential hires, because good writers are, just an apparent and just complete sign that they have an organized mind. So, on your sandbox, start thinking about writing, and start really developing, just making cohesive, clear, understandable blog entries. Well, it doesn't matter what it's about, design, anything, skydiving, it doesn't matter. But what it will do is it'll help, writing, some of the best gains that I've seen as a designer were almost intrinsically linked to me becoming a better writer. It's sort of hard to explain really, but when you're writing, you're telling a story, and the same thing happens when you're doing design. You're putting yourself into that story, and you're really starting to see things really clearly. And the last thing I want to talk about today is tools. We have to realize that the only thing that stands between a creative person and a creative solution is the learning curve of the tools that we need to do the solution. Because I've seen, how many countless times have you seen really great designers just sort of hop around, like, so they'll do design, they'll do print, they'll do motion work, they'll do 3D modeling. And really, once you've started to understand and once you become an expert at design, this is the only thing that's stopping you from being, more efficient. Because I could give everyone in the crowd some paintbrushes and some ink, and I could say to you, I want you guys to draw the Mona Lisa. I want you to paint the Mona Lisa for me. If I gave you 20 years to do that task, you might be able to do it. But the thing that separates Da Vinci from you is that he could do it 100,000 times faster than you could. So really starting to understand that, because he understands all the tools that are needed, to build creative things, he's able to produce them quicker. And a really, kind of just, summarizing quote on this is Paula Scher, who is an American designer who created the city logo, which maybe most of you are familiar with. It's just it's a really simple logo, and essentially what happened was in their first initial design meeting with Citi, she drew the logo on a napkin. And it was kind of tough because when they got back out of the meeting, she showed it to everybody on the team that was involved in that meeting, and they're like, yeah, that's the logo. And there was this sort of really, kind of chaotic moment to where they were like, well, we can't show it to them yet because, when clients kind of come to us and expect us to do creative things, they expect that to take time. They feel like they're buying the process. They feel like they're paying, for time and all this stuff. But, she eventually came back to them after she showed it to them, the next day, and they did kind of freak out a little. What you've got it done already? And she said, of course, it's done in a second because it took me 34 years to learn how to do it in a second. So, really start to think about some of the areas in your design career that you can start putting an effort and an energy into learning how to do new things, getting better at things that maybe you feel you're not very strong at now, because that practice will, that will ultimately lead to you becoming a great designer. So thank you guys very much, and